Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. As I said, we want to continue on with our top stories that we're following today, putting this back up there from the Associated Press. But there has been some developing news as a top Ukrainian official said that his country and the United States have reached a common understanding on the core terms of an agreement to end the nearly 4 years long war. This is, of course, between Russia and Ukraine. Those final negotiations are set to take place between the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump by the weekend. And so to talk a lot more about what we're seeing here and the effects of this, I want to bring into the conversation with CSIS, the senior fellow there, Maria Snegovaya. Maria, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about the very basics. It was breaking news this morning as it came out that the Ukrainian side of things had tentatively agreed to this peace deal that had been put out there by the United States. What was your first reaction to hearing the news? And really, is this something that was expected to come at this point?
Well, Ukraine is not in a great position right now with heavily being reliant on Ukrainian weapons aid, in intelligence support, and not doing so great in the front line as Russia's offensive, unfortunately, keeps advancing in Ukraine. So from that perspective, Ukraine is a weaker side, is being under pressure by the United States, is sort of expected to agree. The ultimate conundrum here is what version of the document is Ukraine agreeing upon, because we've seen the 28-point peace plan allegedly proposed by the U.S. side. Later, we have seen severe modifications that were introduced by European side. And the new version that has been negotiated between Ukraine and Europe, the significant changes are actually more beneficial to Ukraine than the earlier version of the plan, so that may be not the worst possible outcome for Ukraine. The problem here is that especially the key issues, right, Ukraine not joining NATO, which the European version sort of reverts, the huge territorial concessions that the original 28-point plan demanded, and other issues like cap on, for example, Ukraine troops. All of that has been sort of modified and softened in the European version, but the question is now whether it's acceptable to Russia, and the answer is most likely no.
And we know that things have not completely come to a close there either as it comes to the finality of this plan. I do want to put up this post we have from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary. It says, over the past week, the United States has made tremendous progress towards a peace deal by bringing both Ukraine and Russia to the table. There are a few delicate but not insurmountable details that must be sorted out and will require further talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. Maria, we know initially President Trump wanted to get all of this done by Thursday. That Thanksgiving deadline is what he had put out there. Now he's hoping to push it over the mark a little bit sooner. What do you expect to be some of the hangups there that are going to be the main focuses of those conversations coming this week?
Yeah, absolutely. The ambitious deadline proposed by U.S. President, I don't think is really possible, especially given that, as I said before, it's unlikely that the Russian side will be so agreeable. We've seen last night how that its horrible attacks on Ukraine are continuing as we speak, as we are negotiating. So Russia hasn't really shown a lot of flexibility here. The key issues pertain to, first of all, territorial provisions. Russia wants the rest of Donetsk region, about 25% of the territory that it's not controlling at the moment, and Ukraine, understandably, is not eager to give up its own territory, opening potentially further opportunities for Russia to advance deeper into Ukraine. There is the NATO membership issue, because Russia wants Ukraine to forever renounce NATO in its constitution. Ukraine doesn't want to do that, and a lot of the Ukraine struggle right now and exploration is based on possibility of future joining NATO. Military limits. Russia has very severe caps on weaponry at Ukraine's disposal and the troops. That is obviously Ukraine doesn't want to give it up, because there's threat of Russia's future aggression very much present now. And of course, the security guarantees. That is the issue that has to do about the future. What is the guarantees that the West is able to offer to Ukraine against future Russian attacks? There's a lot of debate about that. And perhaps sanctions, frozen assets. The original U.S. plan actually was quite restrictive for Russia, perhaps not ideal, in that most of the frozen assets will be used for a constitution of Ukraine and some profit for the United States. it's unclear whether Russia will be eager to agree to that. I will also flag there's another issue that has to do with the amnesty. So, sweeping amnesty for Russia and Ukraine, especially in light of the human rights violations and crimes that Russian troops have committed on Ukraine's territory, I do not think Ukraine will be eager to accept that. So, as you can see, there's a lot of issues that are not ideal for both Ukraine and Russia, and so I would not anticipate prompt conclusion to this new round of peace negotiations.
And it's important that you added all of that context, Maria. Thank you. And we also know that this is happening as well. Right now, U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, he's currently in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates discussing the plan with the Russian delegation. Ukraine also sent officials there to the UAE, according to a U.S. official. But it's not immediately clear who is exactly participating in these talks for the two sides. If history tells us anything, Maria, in the past, how have these conversations gone behind the scenes between the two countries when it comes down to nailing down some of these agreements that they want to ultimately have peace?
I would flag that there are still irreconcilable differences, in my opinion, that exist between the two sides. What Putin describes the origin of the conflict, that Russia is a fundamentally revisionist country that wants to revise not just, has a different attitude towards Ukraine's sovereignty, but also European security, is very much still there. And it's very hard to envision the sort of security guarantees that the West is able to offer to Ukraine to prevent Russia from future aggression against Ukraine. Just a reminder, it's the fifth war Vladimir Putin has started during his quarter-century rule, and there's no indications that he's willing to stop here. So from that perspective, I would not be overly optimistic about the future of these negotiations.
And when it comes to what happens behind the scenes with these negotiations, as these peace talks are going on and these tentative plans are in place, we do know also what happened this morning. You touched on it briefly, but there was also an attack. There was a side of Russian aggression that happened. So I want to put this up on folks' screen. So in case they missed some of the video footage. But again, several people were killed in this attack. We heard about it there from Volodymyr Zelensky a bit earlier today. Is this likely to continue on while there is nothing firm in place?
Unfortunately, yes. And if anything, Russian attacks of Ukraine has scaled up significantly in the last months. Russia is pushing forward in its current wave of offensive on the ground. It's intensifying its attacks. It's significantly scaled up production of drones and missiles, which allows it to, unfortunately create even more destructions for Ukraine. It also very heavily damaging Ukraine's energy infrastructure. So the idea is to basically exhaust Ukraine to the maximum extent possible in order to force Ukraine to make maximalist concessions. Well, hopefully with the assistance of the Western allies, Ukraine will be standing its ground and continue essentially to push forward those options that are more favorable for it and defend it against future Russia's aggression.
And then we have the post there on the screen from Volodymyr Zelensky talking about it. He says the Russians launched 22 missiles of various types, including aeroballistic ones and more than 460 drones, most of them Russian-Iranian formed there as well. Shaheds, that's what they're called. So it is known that those 4 types of drones have crossed into the airspace of their neighbors as well, Moldova and Romania, with the exact overflight times confirmed. I have to ask you, because there is a European element to all of this. Of course, you mentioned it briefly a bit earlier. The Europeans had their own plan for peace, but he talked about now these drones have entering other European nations, the airspace of there. How does that all affect it in this conflict as it's trying to come to a close?
Well, Russia is trying allegedly to push pressure also on Ukraine's allies in Europe, and so this consistent transgressions in the airspace, drones, violations, incursions that have intensified over the last months certainly is part of this hybrid warfare against Europe. And so it's very important to realize that Vladimir Putin's ambition goes beyond just Ukraine and has a broader perspective in mind with a fundamental revision of European security. And given him a lot of undeserved concessions right now, unfortunately, is only likely to, encourage his appetites going forward, especially absent reliable security guarantees. So from that perspective, unfortunately, the situation is unlikely to resolve anytime soon. If anything, Russia acts more and more emboldened. I will flag that only putting pressure on Ukraine will not suffice. We also need much more serious sanctions pressure on Russia. Its economy already is not doing so great. There are a lot of signs of actually imminent recession recession and Russian economy. And it's not, obviously Russia can still fight this war, but it's getting harder and harder. There was recent steps by the US administration that were very welcome, imposing additional sanctions on Russia's crude oil producing companies, and hopefully we'll see more of that in an effort to also pressure Russia into reconsidering its current posture, not just Ukraine.
And Maria, before I let you go, I want to ask you this. Another piece of this is President Trump has made it a big part of this second administration to try to negotiate peace deals, not only between Russia and Ukraine, but of course he did a lot of work there to restore some sort of order to the Middle East. I have to ask you, the Iranian factor of it all is tied in on both sides, it seems. Obviously, we know that we have dropped ballistic missiles there to destroy nuclear plants here in the United States on Iranian soil as well. How does Iran fit into all of these international conflicts as it plays there, especially as we look forward to this peace deal potentially being signed?
First of all, I would flag that Ukraine-Russia war is different from, say, Israel-Palestinian situation because unlike that other case which concerned ethnic territorial issues, here we have a very plain, straightforward war of aggression, Russia against Ukraine, unprovoked aggression, which is in that case, unfortunately, likely to take much longer to resolve, and that's exactly what we are witnessing. Besides that, unfortunately, over quite some time already, we're tracking an emergence of the so-called axis of upheaval in which Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea are coming together to boost their security cooperation, potentially with revisionist goals in mind. Iran certainly is a big part of the story. It has provided Russia the drones technology, and we see also they're trying to actively develop alternative trade corridors, Iran and Russia, trying to circumvent Western sanctions. So potentially this is something to watch, and it's very important that the West prevents the formation of this potential hostile revisionist axis that potentially will do even more to destroy the current liberal international order as we know it. So we see this merging of various threats across different flanks, and it's important to track them and try to obstruct the formation of this axis.
Maria, we certainly appreciate you for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. She's here with us from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Before I let you go, anything else that we should be paying attention to?
I think that it was very interesting to watch how Russia's oil revenues responded to the latest round of sanctions by the US administration. The enforcement of the sanctions is the most important part. And right now, Russia is undoubtedly heavily investing in circumventing the current sanctions, creating a network of shell companies. And it's very important that the US follows through with secondary round of sanctions, trying to disrupt those, accordingly affecting Russia's energy revenues further and preventing it from investing those into its war machine against Ukraine.
Really, this has been a major topic that we've been following since this war first broke out. Maria, I appreciate you for joining us and for your expertise here on Live Now from Fox. All right, wanted to make sure we brought that to you here on Live Now. What we're going to do now, I want to put up this statement also on your screen here. This is there from the Ukrainian Defense Secretary talking about the peace deal. It says, "We appreciate the productive and constructive meetings in Geneva between Ukrainian and American delegations, as well as President Trump's unwavering efforts aimed at ending the war. Our delegations have reached a common understanding regarding the key terms of this agreement discussed in Geneva. We are now counting on the support of our European partners in the next steps. We expect the organization of a visit by President of Ukraine to the United States at the earliest possible date in November to finalize the final stages and reach an agreement with President Trump." And so again, it's a developing story, one that we'll continue to follow here as those updates come to us on Live Now from Fox.